Alright guys, welcome back to the channel with the daily hatchback here with the messed up hood still. On today's video, I'm going to find out just how fuel efficient an aftermarket intake can be. Now, if you're new to the channel, I'm Jay, and this is Project GoodSpeed. I mostly just deal with, basic performance upgrades or basic maintenance or basically anything to keep my 90s Civic running. So if you like hatchback content, maybe consider subscribing, hit that like button, whatever, it's cool. Now, on today's video, I decided to do a little experiment. Now, this experiment consisted of replacing my stock intake and going with an AEM one that was carb legal so that I could still pass smog. I wanted to find out exactly how fuel efficient different types of intakes were. I tried the stock intake, I tried an auto parts store intake, and currently I just finished trying out the AEM carb legal intake. Now, in my last video, I basically installed it and I gave a quick update on how fuel efficient my stock intake actually was. However, my fuel gauge is a little finicky. I don't know if other 90s cars are the same way, but it tends to basically just shift up and down after you turn it off and then turn it back on. So you don't exactly know where the fuel gauge sits, if it's on empty, or if it's just above empty and you've got maybe a gallon left. I don't know, but I wasn't willing to risk it. So it's not entirely accurate down to the last mile, but I mean, it's good enough for me. I managed to squeeze out a few more miles just because I had somewhere to go. So essentially, I managed to get 327 miles with the stock intake, which brings our grand total of MPG with our stock intake at 30 miles per gallon. Now, I could have just done this without, doing this experiment because I like the way the intake sounds and, it's a little bit, I don't know, it just looks cooler. But I wanted to see just how fuel efficient this hatchback was with a brand new intake compared to other intakes. Now here we have our stock OEM intake. Now essentially this design is better for fuel efficiency. As you can see, the filter is basically hidden inside and only gets air from this port here, I suppose, which means the airflow is kind of restricted. And this means that the engine only gets as much air as it needs, which is better for fuel efficiency because these little Civics, I think they're rated to get somewhere around 30 to 35 MPG. This is the non-VTEC E model, so not the most fuel efficient little Civic. This here is a basic air intake that you can pick up from any auto parts store. Essentially, these Spectre brand are basically just aluminum piping here. It's pretty thick, actually, and your basic air filter on the other end. Now, I installed this years ago, and I took it off pretty soon after. I think I only let this thing last for about a month, so I can get a decent idea of what the MPG was using this filter. And what I found is that with this one, I was getting somewhere around 26 MPG, which was, not that great, considering this is a single cam 1.5. I should be getting better than that. When I first bought this car, I really liked the MPG on this thing, so I just switched back to the stock intake because I didn't really care too much about performance upgrades. And since this is my daily and I don't really, like to punch it that much, I decided the stock intake is what fit me best. Now, after my little experiment of trying to gauge just how well my Civic performed with the new intake, this is what I found. So in my last video, after installing the aftermarket intake, I went to go fill it up with the same amount of fuel so I can keep the little experiment pretty much consistent throughout. And I filled it up with about 10.6 gallons. And now that I've been running it to basically an empty tank, I managed to get around 312 miles to the aftermarket intake. But this is where it gets a little confusing because, as I mentioned before, the fuel gauge is a little untrustworthy and isn't always, exact in telling you that it's actually empty. Which 312 miles out of 10.6 gallons means that brings my MPG roughly to 29. So that's pretty good actually. So basically, even after I installed the aftermarket intake, I'm still getting at least 300 miles to the tank, which means that the AEM intake is pretty damn close to, OEM, which I guess it makes sense considering that this is carb legal, So compared to the auto parts intake, you can see here that our filter on this one is just slightly bigger and basically just takes up more more air, and feeds it into the system more, which is why this one was getting less MPG. Now, since I couldn't be exact with the measurements on it because of my fuel gauge, because it shifts up and down, it's not entirely 100%. I'm not really sure why this one did a whole lot better than that one. It's essentially the same piece. It's just aluminum piping with an air filter on the end. The only reason it's doing worse than our stock one is because that one has limited air capacity because of the way it's designed, But there you have it. Our stock intake MPG compared to our AEM intake MPG is, there is a difference, but overall, I'm still content with the way this played out. It's not terribly bad on fuel. And for my daily hatchback, that's a big plus because I want something that isn't gonna be consuming a lot of fuel if I'm not getting any, the power that I want. And this is the little single cam here, not a lot of power, so I better at least be doing good on fuel. There you have it, guys. If you're interested in installing an AEM intake and are curious to see just how well the fuel efficiency is, I'm getting 29 MPG on this thing, and compared to my stock intake, I was getting closer to 30 something, 30, 31, 30, I don't know, depending on how well you drive or what kind of other aftermarket intakes you guys have. You guys might be getting more, but that's where I'm currently sitting on right now. If you guys like the content, hit that like button, subscribe for future videos, because I plan on doing a lot more upgrades to this little Civic. It's just the start of it. So that's gonna be it for this video, guys. I hope you guys like it, and until next time, take care and good speed.